I talk about leadership, I like to use examples, and I'd like to talk about two things that leaders do that I think are pivotal to the leadership role. And I'd like to use an example to illustrate these two things. First of all, I got to introduce you to a fellow who was a leader I admired, a leader I still admire. His name is Barry Day. And he was initially my boss, and then he became my business partner, and now he's a retired and valued colleague who I still count on as a mentor. And to put this into context, I just need to describe Barry a bit. Imagine in those Looney Tune cartoons you have Foghorn Leghorn having a child with the Tasmanian devil. That's kind of Barry. Always on the go, always in motion, and always talking. So I'll tell you a story about why I admire Barry as a leader and what this has to do with leadership. I go to an interview with Barry at a post-secondary institution, and I'm applying to be the program manager. I go to the interview, he makes me welcome, and he starts talking about the program that I'm going to manage, the organization. And about 40 minutes in, I realize he has not asked a question, nor have I given an answer. And I'm getting a bit perturbed about this when he jumps out of his chair and he says, well, you're the one. And he sticks his hand out to shake my hand. I get out of the chair. And as we're shaking hands, he says, welcome aboard. Start thinking about your successor. So I'm thrilled I've got the job, and I walk down the hallway and I go to my car, and the thrill quickly wears off, and I start asking myself about the successor. What does this mean? So I start thinking, well, man, if I'm supposed to look for a successor, that means I'm not here forever. Where am I going? If I have to look for a successor, that means I got to really get good at this role so I can develop somebody into it. If I have to think about my successor, now I have to start thinking who's reporting to me and what talents they have and what strengths do they have and how do I develop them. And my mind starts racing, and with about 12 other questions. And that is one of the things I'd like to illustrate about leadership. What Barry set up there was a relentless focus on development. Leaders develop people. And what he wanted right at the get-go was for me to think about how I was going to develop people and how I was going to develop myself. Second story that I think is pivotal to leadership. Same leader, Barry. He used to run these staff meetings with this relatively young crew in this post-secondary, and every single staff meeting, he'd go over our vision and our values. And we had created the vision, we had created the values, so it's not like this was foreign information, and quite frankly, we thought it was kind of fluff. And most of us would just roll our eyes waiting for the meeting to end, or that portion of the meeting to end as he reviewed the values and vision we all had. One day he comes in and, oddly enough, doesn't have an agenda sent out prior. So he gives us an agenda. He says, folks, I'm sorry that I didn't send the agenda out prior, but notice, here it is. And notice the first item is about parking and where we're all going to park. We have to reconfigure our parking. So I can't think of anything that interests me less. So I brought a book, and I'm going to read this book while you guys figure out parking. And so, of course, we get into a discussion, and it gets very heated about who should park where, and I'm going for height because I want to park closest to the door, and I think tall people need to be near the door. And of course, other people are going for IQ, and that would put me out on the street, and we're getting into this very heated debate. And then Barry lifts his head up and he says, you know, I haven't been listening, but it's getting kind of loud in here, and it's interrupting my reading. And he says, let me give you a process tip that might help you make some decisions. He said, bounce this decision against our vision and our values. My colleague Marnie goes to the wall and she points at a poster that has the first value of this post-secondary institution, which we'd created, was students. We were there to serve students. And Marnie said, well, if we actually value students, if that's really our first value, we wouldn't have staff parking, would we? And she said that facetiously, but every one of us kind of thought about that for a moment, all kind of looked at our toes and went, right. We don't need staff parking. We shouldn't have staff parking. Let's kill it. And that's the second thing about leadership that I think is incredibly important, is helping a team have direction, reminding them of that direction, and bringing that direction to life through those day-to-day conversations. And that's what Barry did. He was always worried about people's development, but it was always in the context of a direction of a strong vision and a strong set of values.